I'm going to spare you my singing here on a Thursday afternoon. I'm also going to spare you my camera because about 3 minutes before we started, I got a gusher of a nosebleed. And I want to keep the PG-13 rating that we have for these webinars and not get escalated to R for, violence and gore. So I'm going to keep my camera off while I do this and hope that this nosebleed goes away. And it's, again, it's just a lot of cocaine abuse. I'm kidding. All right, let's get started with this year's edition of the podcast landscape, the very first report from the podcast landscape. Today, we're going to go over some core podcast metrics. And this is extremely proud of this report and of this series. This is the third year that we have done the podcast landscape. We've done it with the consistent methodology, consistent questioning. It's taken account video podcasting from the start. And this year, I'm pleased to say that it's an award-winning project. It's an award-winning program. We recently won a Global Content Marketing Institute Award for Best Data Storytelling. So we're all very proud of that here. And we are especially grateful to our core sponsors for this project, and without whom none of this would be possible. We've published, I think, 21 reports in the past just 3 years. That sounds profitable with our merry little band of pirates. And none of that would be possible without BetterHelp, tremendous brand sponsor and benefactor of the space. Without our friends at NPR, who've been with us since the beginning, thank you. Our friends at ESPN Podcasts, who have supported so much of what we have done, as well as American Public Media, who have also been real friends of ours the past couple of years supporting this project. And of course, Sirius XM Podcast Network, which have supported this project and events and so many other things that we have done. Thank you. And a big thank you to our research partners at Signal Hill Insights. So as I mentioned, this year, there's so much data in this. We're going to be putting out some reports gradually over the next few months for this project. But for today, we're going to do, I'm calling this part one, core podcast metrics. And we will do some future reports from this on things like churn and discovery, and some special projects on video and even one on politics. We've got some questions in here about the podcast election and so forth. So all of that will come later on in the fall and as we get into the winter. And it's as I talk to you here today in Boston, it's actually a little crisp in the air. It almost feels like fall. So it's won't be long before we've got trick-or-treaters and Thanksgiving turkeys and then Christmas trees, and then we all fall into our dying sun. But before all of that, I've got a pumpkin spice laced webinar for you with some core podcast metrics. So as always, this project has a very large sample this year, a sample of 5,034 Americans 18 plus, fielded by our friends at Signal Hill Insights. And it's weighted to the most recent census data. And again, very consistent methodology for the last 2 years for things like video podcasting, audio podcasting, and so forth. We've asked a whole variety of questions about usage and behavior, why people do or do not consume podcasts. And as I mentioned, in future reports, we're going to talk about things like churn, why people stop listening, why non-listeners have not taken the plunge, and so on. But let's start with some core metrics here. All people are familiar with the term podcast. I think I can probably start deleting this slide in the future. I think that 4%, I have not met that 4%. I understand they're lovely people, but most people are at least familiar with the term podcast. And I think over the past couple of years, especially with the number of celebrity podcasts that are out there, I think most people have a sense of what a podcast is. And maybe that sense differs. Maybe for some of those folks, they think it's, a chat show, which I think that is what a podcast is for many people. But I think most people really have a sense of what, in fact, a podcast is. So that familiarity is quite high. And we also ask, when was the last time you consumed a podcast, either audio or video? And I'm going to break this down with some year-over-year trends for the last 3 years. But just sort of broadly, 38% in the past week, plus 17% in the past 30 days. You add those together, and that's a 55% monthly reach for podcasting. And of course, a quarter of there say that they have never consumed a podcast. So I want to break this down year over year and kind of show where we are. And I think you're going to get to see a very clear pattern here over the last 3 years. So, first of all, in terms of have you ever consumed a podcast, we've gone from 72 to 74 to 75, right? Not a dramatic amount of growth here, and really just a 1 percentage point kind of margin of error growth year over year from last year. That's forever. If we look at monthly consumption, it did go back up this year, but broadly, if you step back, it's flat. And I don't want to say it's plateaued because that sounds permanent, but I will say that it is certainly slowed, uh, and it's probably going to take some kind of external marketing to really drive that more. I think in the future, and this was something that I had suspected when I saw some earlier figures earlier this year from Edison, and then of course looking at our data for the last couple of years, that I think the reach in consumption has certainly slowed and it's kind of flatlined over the past few years. You see that monthly, and you also see that weekly. It's up a skosh here to 38% from 37. But again, if you just step back over the last 3 years, it appears to be flat. Now it's flat at a fairly high number, I would add, because the percentage who say they've ever consumed a podcast at 75% is really higher than the reach of spoken word audio in this country, which if you look at talk radio plus audiobooks plus audio podcasting and kind of fold all that together, that's usually about 2/3 of the country. And I think the fact that it's up to 75, I think is probably a testament to the additional growth that video has added to the space. Uh, so I don't want this to be entirely doom and gloom. I think we're at some fairly high numbers here, although I believe that the weekly consumption can continue to go up. And I base that on this graph, which is a graph I like to show every year of awareness, trial, and usage. And if you look here, the percentage of those who say they've ever listened to or watched a podcast who are now weekly users, it's about half, right? And that particular ratio I like to look at in a variety of different media types. And that ratio is higher with a number of other media platforms. It's certainly higher. It's probably the highest with the most active social media platforms like Facebook and Instagram. I think it's certainly higher with broadcast radio, in fact. So that 1 to 2 ratio or 2 to 1 ratio, I think that could be a little bit better. So while I would not expect the ever listened slash watched line to grow appreciably in the next few years, I think we can do better on conversion to weekly users. So that's kind of where we are on that. Looking at the age profile, really unchanged from last year. The age profile of monthly podcast consumers continues to be a bit younger than the population, continues to be, I think, tremendous opportunity 55 plus, especially as that 55 plus bulge continues to grow in our population. But you absolutely here see that 18 to 34 and 35 to 54 remain really the strengths of podcasting. And when you look at the profile of people who say they have ever consumed a podcast, not just monthly, but ever, compared to those who never have, you really see that opportunity. 61% here are 55 plus. And again, so many people are basically aging into that. I think it really is at this point just a matter of marketing to them and marketing to them in other media, marketing to them in things outside of podcasts, because we know that the content is there. The gender, again, no change from last year. I mean, really, today and this year is really, I think, a story of stasis. There are going to be very few changes, a couple of significant ones that I'll get to in a bit, but not in the demographics of podcast consumers. It still leans a little bit male. 56% of monthly podcast consumers are men compared to 44% women. Again, the population is 51-49. And I will show you again what those who ever listen to a podcast compared to those who never consume a podcast. And you can see that those who have never consumed absolutely lean female. And those figures are identical to last year's. So there remains a tremendous opportunity, I think, to bring more 55 plus to the format, particularly older women, women older than 55, I should say, to the format. So, and again, I suspect some of that may be marketing. I think there is the content there. So I do think it's just kind of getting the word out about podcasting to some of these to this undiscovered country, I think that remains out there for us. Now, we did see monthly growth this year from 53 to 55%. It was 55 a couple of years ago. So again, when you step back, it looks a little flat. But that growth year over year was really driven multiculturally. And what we see here is that the numbers, especially for Asian and Black Americans, really went up year over year. The white number stayed the same. It's the white number really that keeps it at 55, with the other, with Hispanics, Asians, and Blacks in this country all kind of going up a little bit year over year. So the growth that we have seen has absolutely been driven by multicultural audiences. Now, here's a question that we asked last year. When you think of a podcast, do you expect it to be audio or video? And this is last year's result: 26% audio only, 38% usually audio. And you see here only 3% say video only, and 12% usually video. So you look at this last year, and there's absolutely a perception that podcasting is an audio forward, audio first medium, even though there are certainly significant percentages of people who perceive video in there as well. And video has had a significant role in the recent growth of the medium. But the numbers that are really going to change here, this is last year, this is this year. The numbers that really changed here, I'm going to highlight them. It's these two. It's not the video only, and it's not the usually video numbers. Those did not change. But you see a shift here from people moving from audio only, which was 26% last year, and shifting more towards maybe either. And to me, that tells a story not of everybody has to do video. That tells a story of choice. That tells a story of the flexibility of podcasting, because it did not go from audio only to usually video or video only. I think people want the choice. And we do see from other research that we have done that people consume both versions of podcasts that are available in both audio and video. So the real growth here is maybe either. And I think that, again, speaks to the flexibility of this medium and the fact that consumers want choice. There's no question that we have seen YouTube particularly grow as the app of choice or service of choice for tens of millions of Americans over the past couple of years. And they, in fact, listen and watch on YouTube, which I'll show you in just a moment. Now, one thing that video has done, I think, is it's increased the time we have spent consuming podcasts. So, yes, the growth in reach may be slowing, and I think that's pretty clear over the past 2 or 3 years. But this is a number that has grown. And this is from, again, last year. The average time spent with podcasts in a typical week amongst weekly consumers last year was 6 hours. And the number that's really going to grow here is that more than 10 hours, which last year was 18%. This year it's 21%. And that brings that average up to 6.3 hours. So it's about an extra 20 minutes, right? And that, I think, absolutely is being driven by video. We have seen the heavy video consumers and video first podcast consumers consuming significantly more hours of podcasting per week. So I think that's directly attributable to that. So even though the reach of podcasting seems to have slowed, the time spent with podcasting is growing. And I think that's a very important story for us. So what are people using to consume their podcasts? And there's something I think really interesting on this particular slide. The iPhone is continues to be number one, followed by Android smartphone, and then desktop or laptop computer. But number four here, smart TV, is something that has continued to grow year over year. And when you have almost 10% of monthly podcast consumers saying it's their smart TV that they use most, that's worth paying attention to. And I think what's happening here with the smart TV, and I think this is particularly true, by the way, with older Americans, it's not that they're particularly only watching, although certainly watching is a big part of it. People often use their TVs for audio only. In fact, if you look at reports like Edison's share of ear, audio on the TV is generally in the 4 to 5% range, and that's not MTV, which, as we know, does not play a lot of music. It's the kind of music choice and cable music offerings that are often kind of at the end of your cable package, or simply listening to music television of whatever type, audio only. So I think what's happening here is that consumers and again, I think this tends to lean a little bit more 55 plus, are just using their smart TV as the operating system for their media, and whether it's audio or video. So that is continuing to grow. One that is really declining here is smart speakers. I think smart speakers have gone down quite a bit over the past couple of years. You see that down at 1%. We also asked for those who do use a smart TV to consume their podcast, what is the app or service that they use the most? And overwhelmingly, that's YouTube. 76% of that 9% say that YouTube is the app or service they use the most to consume podcasts on their television set. So I think, again, that speaks to the growing importance of YouTube, not necessarily the growing importance of video, but certainly the significance of YouTube as a podcast app. What app or service do you use most often to consume podcasts? This is overall. YouTube is at the top at 40%, followed by Spotify at 18, and then the Apple services at 11, and then of course YouTube Music, other down there at 6%. But what we're seeing here, and I'm going to show you just a comparison of the top three year over year, is that YouTube is continuing to grow its share a little bit. Apple remained static year over year, but Spotify actually declined a couple of percentage points. So again, and I think we've written about this in the past at the Sounds Profitable newsletter. A lot of that is not necessarily video, but it's down to the services and features and benefits of the app itself. YouTube is a very good podcast app, and I think that's increasingly how many people want to find and consume their podcasts. But again, Apple stayed the same. Spotify declined a little bit year over year. And I just showed you some data on YouTube's importance with smart TVs. And then what app or service do you use second most often? Top answer here, none. We have a lot of people who are monoserviceable. I'm not sure that that's a term, but again, I've just had a pretty tremendous nosebleed. And so the oxygen in my brain is declining rapidly. But 26% say they only use one service. And again, Spotify, YouTube, Amazon Music, and so on are the second most frequently named services used to consume podcasts. Now, this is not a measure of the amount of content that is being streamed or downloaded on these services. This is a measure of people and the percentage of people who say that's their second or first most popular service. Now, this graph is super fascinating to me, and I want to spend a little bit of time on this. We asked people who said that their primary service or who use YouTube to consume podcasts, what percentage of the podcasts that you consume on YouTube are video? And we asked the same thing of Spotify. And this, I believe I wrote about last week, and there were a couple of surprises here. First thing I want to point out about YouTube, this is the percentage of podcasts consumed by watching, right? So for YouTube, that dark blue slice, 0 to 24%, so less than a quarter are being watched. 22% of YouTube users said that, and another 25% said 25 to 50. So just under half of YouTube podcast consumers, 47%, say that they listen to more than they watch, right? So again, we're not just talking video here when we're talking about YouTube. About a third say that they watch 76 to 100%, and another 19% watch 51 to 75%. But just under half say that they listen to more than they watch on YouTube. That's kind of surprise number one, potentially to some of you. The second thing, and this one surprised even me, was how much of the podcast content on Spotify was being watched. And I had some questions about whether or not people were actually watching content on Spotify. And certainly 47% say that they listen to under a quarter. Listen to more than three quarters, right? That 0 to 24% watched is 47%. So listening is still the dominant modality on Spotify. But if you add together the 51 to 75 and the 76 to 100, you get about 3 in 10 Spotify podcast consumers saying that they watch more than half. And, to be fair, Rogan would account for a lot of that, a pretty significant percentage of that. But still, I think this shows that people are watching content on Spotify. But to me, the real message of this particular slide is just how much content is listened to on YouTube. And again, whether that is through minimizing a browser or a tab in the background or a phone in your pocket, it's not all video consumption on YouTube. Now, I'm going to show you data from 3 years here for this question. And what you're going to see here is that very little changes. And I'm going to focus on something in just a moment that is towards the bottom of this list. So this was in 2023. How important is each benefit to you? At the top, listen to discussions on topics of interest, followed by sort of utility purposes, something to listen to while traveling, something to listen to while walking or exercising. Audio to keep me company, and then audio to accompany household chores. Companion mediaship, really the top reasons here. That was 2023. 2024, almost nothing changed. Nothing, the order of things did not change here. Things may have gone up or down a percentage point or two, but 2023 to 2024, no real changes. And when we get to this year, to 2025, the only thing that changed more than a percentage point or two was get news or political analysis. And we'll also see that reflected in the genre rankings that I'm going to get to here in just a moment. So there is a bit of a heightened interest, at least with the podcast consumer, in getting news or political analysis. That's the only thing that went up more than a percentage point or two. And I think that's down to just how active the podcast consumer is with news and current events. I think there are certainly other audiences who are avoiding the news right now, but clearly the podcast consumer is not one of them. How long have you been consuming podcasts in general? I love to look at the stat to make sure that we're still bringing new people in. And yes, we are. 17% say just within the past 6 months. And you can contrast that to 19% at the top who say in more than 5 years ago. So there's a nice mix here. Of course, mathematically, if you have 17% saying they have just discovered it in the past 6 months, and you don't see significant growth in the overall reach of podcasting, that means that we have churned some people out who are not actively consuming podcasts. And that's going to be the subject of one of the subjects of our second report from this, which will come out in just a couple of weeks. Why do people quit listening to or watching podcasts? But on the surface of it, this is a fairly healthy looking litmus strip, as we call it, with certainly some signs of churn, but also plenty of new people coming in and discovering the format. This is a number that has kind of stabilized. It's up a bit from 2023, and it's corroborated by a study that recently also came out that was presented at Podcast Movement called the Podcast Study, where they also intimated that we consume about 3 different titles a week. You think about the podcasts that you follow, how many different titles do you consume regularly this year? The mean is 3.4. Last year was 3.5. I think we can call that a wash. That is, both of those, though, are up a bit from 2023. And thinking back to a year ago, are you spending more or less time consuming podcasts today than you did then? 44% say they're spending more time compared to 18% who say less time. And again, that's corroborated and backed up, I think, by the hours spent going up from 6 hours per week last year to 6.3 this year, which, with the, 0.3 does not sound like much. It is, though. It's about 20 minutes. And that 20 minutes, I think, is in the face of the reach of podcasting. The monthly reach of podcasting actually going up a little bit, the weekly reach going up 1 percentage point, not huge growth. But the fact that the time spent with podcasting went up, I think, as a percentage even more than that, speaks to the fact that this graph is true. People are spending more time consuming podcasts. I mentioned before that I was going to talk about the genres here. Which of the following podcast genres have you consumed in the last 30 days? This was last year. Comedy, news, sports, political talk, and true crime were in the top 5. Only a couple of real differences this year when we look at this year's list, and I'll stay on this for a bit. Political talk moved up in the rankings. It only went up 2 percentage points, but that was enough to put it into second. So again, we're seeing some signs here that the podcast audience is a little more politically active this year. And we are going to have a complete standalone report probably before the end of this year on politics and podcasting and the kind of podcast election that we have all gone through. Other than that, though, nothing here changed more than 1 percentage point, perhaps 2 percentage points. This year we added kids and family, so that was a new category at 9%. We didn't track that last year. We are tracking that this year. But all of that, I think, speaks to this particular audience being fairly entrenched and the space kind of maturing. And I think, uh, for people that are finding it more difficult to break through in podcasting right now, this is why. I don't think it's anything more sinister than that. It is the space maturing. It is people settling on favorite podcasts that they like, and I think in some ways it is harder to break through, particularly without marketing. But that does not mean that the space itself is suffering. The space itself is doing very, very well. I want to back up to a graph. Forgive me if I make you sick here for just a moment. But there's one other thing I wanted to say about this particular graph, and it relates to the genres as well. When you ask people, if you look at the following benefits associated with podcasting, how important is each benefit to you? I want to point out the one that's at the bottom both years, and in fact, all 3 years that we have asked this question, and that is hear from celebrities. That's really far down from things like listen to discussions on topic of interest or even get news or political analysis or business news or information. It's really far down at the bottom. And I am going to have something to say about that when we get to the end here, I think, and we kind of wrap up what the real takeaways from this report are. A question that we have asked all 3 years here, we asked people to name their favorite podcasts, and people will name up to three. This is not listening. This is not watching. This is not total audience. This is the percentage of American podcast consumers who name these shows as their favorite, right? So that's different than consumption. It's basically top of mind preference, right? And what I want to point out here, a couple of things. First of all, the what you see here, Crime Junkie, The Daily, Caller Daddy, numbers 2, 3, and 4 here, those all grew year over year. Last year, Crime Junkie and The Daily were at 2% of Americans saying that that was their favorite, or American podcast consumers. Caller Daddy was at 1%. So those three have grown quite a bit. And I want to mention here that 1% on this list is still 2 to 3 million Americans. So none of these are small numbers. It's just really a sign that the podcast space continues to be very fragmented. The other thing I want to point out is that last year, number one, the Joe Rogan Experience, was 13, and number two, Crime Junkie, was 2. That's an 11 percentage point gap. This year, with Joe Rogan at 11 and Crime Junkie at 4, Rogan's gone down. The next three have gone up. That gap has gone from 11 percentage points to 7 percentage points. And I submit that that's a healthy thing. Not anything against Joe Rogan in particular, but just the fact that there's starting to be a little bit more of a spread here at the top, and it's not so dominated by any one podcast, which I think this is a healthier screen. Last couple of consumption questions here. Do you currently consume any of the following podcast types? And what I would point out here, first of all, is that these numbers, again, are largely unchanged from last year, which, as a lifetime survey researcher, is really a testament to stable, excellently conducted research as well. But the percentage who say a limited series podcast with a fixed number of episodes remains about half of the size of the audience who say that they consume podcasts that publish a new episode regularly. So that ratio is almost exactly 2 to 1, and that's what it was last year. And additionally, this number did not change from last year either. I think last year the no might have been 26%. When you finish a limited series, do you look for another podcast to consume? 3/4 of limited series consumers say that they do look for another podcast to consume. So I'm going to get to a couple more data points and some summary findings here in a moment, but I do want to point out that we have some more reports coming up. We've got part 2 of this project, which is all going to be about churn and discovery and non-listeners. We're going to have a special report on TV and film companion podcast audiences. And we're going to have the creators. Now, the very first research project that we conducted at Sounds Profitable was actually the creators back in 2022. And that was a look at the demographics and behaviors of the people who say that they create podcasts. And I'm very pleased to say that we're going to update that this year, later on in the fall, with the Creators 2025. And I'll tease a couple of graphs from that. First of all, 17% of those who have ever consumed a podcast, right? So that's 75% ever. 17% of them say that they have actually created some kind of a podcast in the past or currently, right? So that's a fairly healthy percentage. And when you take that 17% and break it out, here's what you get. And this is that 17% who say they've ever created a podcast broken out. 20% say they currently create an audio show, 24% a video show, 24% both, and a third say that they have created podcasts in the past but aren't doing it currently. So when we put out the Creators 2025, we're going to look at these four segments in detail, where they are similar, how they differ, and really get a good, healthy, credible look at the current state of the creator demographic in America. So we're very excited about that. But I want to wrap up with what I think are really the key findings of this particular part of the podcast landscape. First of all, I think the podcast space is maturing. Organic growth here has slowed, which means I think we need to market ourselves a little bit more. And it's certainly something I've always talked about. But here's something I would love to see. I would love to see some of the biggest podcasts, and I mean the sort of the big celebrity shows that are dominating the tops of the various download charts these days. I would love to hear them talking more about the medium. I would love to hear them do live reads about other podcasts. I would love to hear them do live reads about other genres of podcasting and not just other kind of celebrity interview shows and the like. So I would love to see some of the largest shows give back a little bit and talk about the space a little bit more, because I think that's something that we need to do. I think we need to talk about ourselves. We need to talk about ourselves more, certainly within our own podcast, but we need to talk about ourselves outside of our podcast spaces as well. And I would love to see some of the largest shows give back a little bit, and really kind of sell the space to America at large. The growth that we have seen, and we did see a little bit of growth this year over last year in monthly and weekly, it's been primarily driven by multicultural audiences and video. Video is certainly contributing, not just to the growth in reach, which was limited, but also the growth in the time spent consuming podcasts throughout the course of the week. And that was a more significant growth factor, I think. There's a clear opportunity, and I had this finding last year. It remains true this year. There's a clear growth opportunity, 55 plus, especially with women. And I don't believe necessarily that's a content issue. I do think that is a marketing issue. I think that's getting the benefits and features of podcasting in front of more people in those demographics, and reaching them where they're currently consuming media now. And that's certainly not podcasting. Increasingly, podcast consumers are celebrating the flexibility of podcasting. It's not that they're all going to video, but what is happening is that increasingly more podcast consumers have an expectation that their favorite shows will be available in audio and video. So again, I think this is less about everybody has to do video and more about the flexibility and offering the choice. And that means, by the way, that if you are producing a video podcast, that you have to understand that there's a healthy percentage of podcast consumers who want to be able to consume that in audio. So it has to work in audio as well. YouTube continues to increase its share. It's gone up year over year as the most popular service. It's also right now the service that at 3/4 of smart TV podcast consumers are using to get their podcasts. So YouTube is continuing to grow there. And again, as we have seen, that's not just about video. YouTube is widely used as an audio platform, which means that your podcasts have to be able to work without video. And that's really, really key. It's about choice, flexibility, and environmental dictates and context that people want to be able to watch it if they can, listen if they can't. So it has to be able to work both ways. The dominance of the Joe Rogan experience is beginning to show some signs of erosion. That gap, that lead between the number one and number two most favorite podcast, that has gone down. And by the way, you see that week to week when you look at the various download charts that get reported in Pod News and other places. You Joe Rogan's not always number one, right? So week to week, that can change. And what we're seeing here in this data is that the gap here in top of mind preference in favorite podcast, that has gone down year over year as some of the other podcasts in the top 5 and in the top 10 have grown that top of mind preference. And the last thing I'll point out here is among the many benefits of podcasting, and this has been true for the last 3 years, hearing from celebrities ranks the lowest. And I would encourage entities out there that are putting together, new ventures, new shows, new efforts into the space. Certainly, there are celebrity podcasts that work because those celebrities are excellent at what they do, right? Dax Shepard is very, very good at what he does, and you have absolutely some celebrity-driven podcasts out there that work because of the talent and the skill of the celebrity at putting on a show. But merely putting a celebrity on a podcast, and we have seen this in a number of various shapes and forms over the past few years, it not only is not a guarantee of success, it's pretty low on what people are looking for. And yes, it might get some buzz, it might get some success, but it's not enough. People are looking for companions. They're looking for information on topics that interest them. They're looking for hobbies. They're looking for business news. They're looking for political news. They're looking for true crime. They're looking for specific things. And just having a celebrity is not only not a guarantee of success, but it's amongst the lowest ranking things that people are actually perceiving as a benefit of podcasting. So that's the end of this first part. I also I want to thank you. I want to thank our whole team at Sounds Profitable. Thank you, Brian, Gavin, and Lauren. Special thank you to BetterHelp, to NPR, ESPN Podcasts, American Public Media, the Sirius XM Podcast Network, and our research partners at Signal Hill Insights, who once again did a fantastic job helping me put this all together. Over 600 of you registered for this. These webinars continue to be some of the largest podcasting events of the year. So I thank you very, very much for the gift of your time and attention. I'm sorry you did not see my nosebleed face today. That was just that's a horror show, folks. But enjoy your pumpkin spice coffees and teas as we enter into the fall. And we'll be back in touch with you very, very soon with the next part of the podcast landscape, part 2 on churn and discovery. So on behalf of all of us, our wonderful sponsors, and all of us at Sounds Profitable, thanks again for the gift of your time and attention, and I'll see you next time.